Hello and welcome back to the Candlelit Journal. Tonight we return to our familiar Crossroads Inn where the innkeeper tends his fire and waits for whoever the road might bring. In the pages that follow, you will meet a most unusual visitor, a traveling merchant whose wares are not quite what they seem. His cart carries objects that whisper of distant places and forgotten times, and somehow each item seems to know exactly who it is meant for. So settle in now. Let the warmth of the hearth reach you through these words. Let the soft crackle of the fire and the gentle scratch of pen on parchment carry you into rest. The innkeeper is already waiting, his journal open, the white candle burning steady on the mantle. Let us begin.
The 17th day of October's the autumn wind arrived today with purpose. I noticed it first in the morning when I stepped outside to draw water from the spring. The air had changed overnight, carrying with it the sharp smell of dying leaves and something else, something older, the kind of scent that settles deep in the chest and reminds a person that winter is no longer a distant thought, but a quiet promise drawing near. The oak tree at the crossroads had begun to shed in earnest. Its leaves, scattered across the road in waves of copper and rust, tumbling end over end whenever the breeze stirred. I stood there for a moment, bucket in hand, watching them dance. There is something peaceful about the way autumn strips things bare. It does not apologize for its work. It simply prepares the world for what must come next. I turned inside and set about my morning tasks. The fire needed building up. The bread from yesterday had gone slightly stale, so I sliced it thick and toasted it near the coals, drizzling honey over each piece until the edges gleamed golden in the firelight. I brewed a pot of chamomile tea, letting the dried flowers steep until the water turned pale yellow and fragrant. The common room filled slowly with warmth, pushing back against the chill that crept beneath the door. By mid-morning, I had swept the floors, restocked the kindling box, and checked the root cellar for anything that might be turning. The carrots were holding well. The onions had begun to sprout slightly, so I pulled them forward to use first. The potatoes sat in their bins like sleeping stones, cool and patient. I selected a few for the evening stew, along with a turnip and some dried herbs from the bundles hanging above the mantel. The inn was quiet. No guests had stayed the previous night, and the road remained empty well past noon. I did not mind. Quiet days have their own rhythm, their own gentle demands. I mended a tear in one of the wool blankets from the common sleeping room. I polished the brass handles on the front door until they caught the afternoon light. I sat for a while by the window, watching the clouds gather over the mountains to the north, their bellies heavy with rain that had not yet fallen. It was late afternoon when I heard the cart. The sound reached me before the sight of it, wooden wheels creaking against packed earth, the steady clop of hooves, slow and unhurried. I rose from my chair and moved to the window, pushing the curtain aside to peer out at the crossroads. A wagon had appeared on the western road, emerging from the tree line like something stepping out of a dream. It was larger than most merchant carts, covered by a canvas of deep burgundy that rippled gently in the wind. The horse pulling it was a dappled gray, old but strong, its mane tangled with what looked like dried flowers and small wooden beads. The driver sat hunched on the bench, wrapped in a heavy cloak the color of storm clouds, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over their face. I watched as the cart approached the crossroads and then, without hesitation, turned toward the inn. By the time the merchant reached my door, I had already put the kettle on. I opened the door before he could knock, the warmth of the common room spilling out into the cooling evening air. He looked up from beneath his hat, and I saw a face weathered by countless roads. Deep lines creased his cheeks and forehead. His eyes were the pale gray of winter ice, sharp and clear despite the years written in his skin. A thin beard, more silver than anything else, covered his chin. He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that seemed to know something I did not. "Welcome," I said. "The fire is warm, and there is stew on the hearth. You are welcome to rest here as long as you need." He inclined his head in a gesture that felt almost formal, like a bow from an older time. "Thank you," he said. His voice was soft, roughened at the edges by years of use. "I have been on the road for many days. A warm fire sounds like a blessing." I helped him stable his horse, a patient creature that nuzzled my hand when I offered it a carrot from my pocket. The merchant moved slowly but deliberately, unhitching the animal and leading it into the shelter with the ease of long practice. He spoke softly to the horse as he worked, words I could not quite catch, murmured in a language that might have been prayer or might have been something older still. When we returned inside, I served him a bowl of the stew I had prepared. Root vegetables, barley, a few scraps of salted pork I had been saving, all simmered together until the broth grew thick and rich. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, his eyes half closed in something like gratitude. I poured him a mug of warm cider and sat across from him at the table nearest the fire. "You traveled far?" I asked. He nodded, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Farther than most," he said. "Farther than I intended some days, but the road has a way of stretching itself out when you are not watching." Now I understood what he meant. The roads in this region have a habit of taking longer than they should, of winding through places that do not appear on any map. I have heard travelers speak of it before, though none have ever been able to explain it clearly. It simply is. "What brings you to the crossroads?" I asked. He set down his spoon and looked at me with those pale eyes. "I am a merchant," he said. "I trade in things that people need." I glanced toward the window, toward where his cart sat outside, the burgundy canvas dark against the fading light. "What sort of things?" His smile returned, that knowing expression that seemed to hold secrets in its corners. "That depends," he said, "on who is asking." He said the 18th day of October. The merchant spent the night in one of the private rooms upstairs. I could hear him moving about late into the evening, unpacking something, rearranging. The floorboards creaked beneath his footsteps in a rhythm I did not recognize, as though he were pacing out measurements or following some pattern only he could see. In the morning, he asked if he might set up his wares in the common room. I do not usually allow such things. The inn is a place of rest, not commerce. But there was something in the way he asked, something earnest and almost humble, that made me hesitate. He seemed to understand my reluctance without my having to voice it. "I will not pressure anyone," he said. "I will simply lay out what I have. If something calls to someone, they may take it. If not, I will pack it away and move on. I ask only for the space to let things find their proper homes." I considered this for a long moment. The fire crackled softly in the hearth. The white candle on the mantel seemed to flicker slightly brighter, though there was no draft to stir it. Finally, I nodded. He spent the better part of the morning arranging his goods on one of the long tables near the window. I watched from the kitchen doorway as I prepared bread for the day, fascinated despite myself by what emerged from the worn leather cases and cloth bundles he had brought down from his cart. There were objects I could name: a brass compass, its face worn smooth by countless thumbs, a small knife with a bone handle, the blade slightly curved like a crescent moon, several books bound in leather of varying colors, their spines unmarked, a collection of glass bottles in shades of blue and green and amber, some empty, some containing liquids that seemed to shift color when the light caught them, candles of every size, some plain white, others dyed deep crimson or forest green, a wooden box that appeared to be a puzzle, its surface covered in interlocking geometric patterns. But there were other things too, things I could not quite identify. A sphere of what might have been crystal or might have been ice that would not melt, resting in a velvet-lined case, a length of rope that seemed to shimmer faintly as though woven from something other than ordinary fiber, a mirror no larger than my palm, its surface dark until you looked directly into it, at which point it seemed to show not your reflection, but something else entirely, something that moved behind the glass like a figure seen through fog. I did not ask about these items. Something told me I would not receive a straight answer if I did. The first travelers arrived around midday, a young couple heading west toward the frontier settlements. They had the look of newlyweds about them, the way they moved together, the way their hands found each other without conscious thought. They were tired from the road, but happy, their faces flushed with the excitement of beginning a new life in an unknown place. They ordered bread and cheese and sat at a table near the fire, speaking softly to each other about the homestead they planned to build, the seeds they had brought from their family's gardens, the future stretching out before them like an unwritten page. The merchant watched them from his corner, saying nothing. He had settled into a chair beside his table of wares, looking for all the world like an old man resting after a long journey. But I noticed the way his eyes followed the young couple, the way his attention sharpened when they glanced toward his display. After perhaps an hour, the young woman rose and wandered over to the table. Her husband followed, curious. "What is all this?" she asked. The merchant spread his hands. "Things I have collected," he said. "Things that have come to me over the years, waiting to be passed on to those who need them." She picked up a small wooden box, turning it over in her hands. It was plain, unadorned, made of some dark wood I did not recognize. When she opened it, there was nothing in sight. "What is this for?" she asked. The merchant tilted his head. "What do you want it to be for?" She laughed, but there was something uncertain in the sound. "I do not know," she said. "We are going west to build a homestead. We have tools and seeds and supplies. I do not know what I would need a box for." The merchant nodded slowly. "Sometimes," he said, "we do not know what we need until we have it. Sometimes the need comes later." She looked at the box again, and something in her expression changed, a softening around the eyes, a quieting of the uncertainty. "They will take it," she said. "How much?" The merchant waved his hand. "A gift," he said, "for your new beginning." She tried to argue, to offer payment of some kind, but he refused every suggestion. Eventually, she tucked the small box into her traveling bag, thanking him with a warmth that seemed to surprise even her. Her husband shook the merchant's hand, and they departed shortly after, heading west into the afternoon light. I asked the merchant about the box later, when the common room had grown quiet again. What was special about it? He looked at me with those pale eyes. "Nothing," he said. "And everything. It was empty. But she will fill it with something precious someday. A lock of hair from her first child, a pressed flower from her wedding day, a letter from someone she loves. The box was waiting for those things. It knew where it needed to go." I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing at all. The 19th day of October. Rain came in the night, a steady downpour that drummed against the roof and turned the roads to mud. I woke to the sound of water streaming from the eaves, the world outside wrapped in a gray curtain that muffled everything to a whisper. The merchant was already awake when I came downstairs. He sat by the window, watching the rain with an expression I could not read. His table of wares stood untouched, the objects arranged it exactly as they had been the day before. In the dim morning light, they seemed to glow faintly, as though holding on to some warmth of their own. I prepared breakfast in silence. Porridge with honey and dried berries, toasted. Bread with butter. Tea steeped strong against the chill. The merchant ate slowly, as he did everything, savoring each bite as though it might be his last. More travelers arrived throughout the morning, driven indoors by the weather. First came a peddler, a thin man with nervous hands and a sack full of ribbons and thread and small brass buttons. He was heading south, he said, to the lowland markets, where such things were in demand. He spread his wares on one of the smaller tables and attempted to interest the other guests in his goods, but no one was buying. Eventually, he gave up and sat alone in a corner, nursing a mug of ale and staring at the rain. Then came a scholar, a woman of middle years with ink-stained fingers and spectacles perched on the end of her nose. She carried a leather satchel stuffed with papers and books, and she asked immediately if I had a quiet place where she might work. I offered her a seat by the hearth, and she settled in with a sigh of relief, spreading her documents across the table and losing herself in whatever she was researching. After that, a family, a man, his wife, and 3 children under the age of 10. They were moving north to be closer to the wife's family in one of the mountain villages. The children were restless, cooped up by the weather, and their mother looked exhausted. I offered her tea and watched as the children explored the common room, their eyes wide with curiosity at everything they saw. The merchant watched them all. It was the peddler who approached the table first. He had been glancing at it all morning, trying to appear disinterested but failing. Finally, he stood and wandered over, his hands clasped behind his back as though to prevent himself from touching anything. "Curious things you have here," he said. The merchant nodded. "I've collected them over many years." The peddler picked up the brass compass, turning it over in his hands. The needle swung slowly, settling on a direction that was not quite north. "This is broken," he said. The merchant shook his head. "No," he said. "It simply points to something other than north." The peddler frowned. "What does it point to then?" The merchant smiled. "That depends on who is holding it." The peddler set the compass down quickly, as though it had grown hot in his hands. He moved on, examining other items. The knife, which he deemed too small for practical use. The books, which he could not read because they were written in languages he did not recognize. The bottles, which he suspected contained nothing of value. But then he stopped. In the corner of the table, half hidden behind a stack of candles, sat a small leather pouch. It was unremarkable in every way, plain brown leather with a simple drawstring closure. But the peddler stared at it as though it were made of gold. "What is this?" he asked. The merchant glanced at the pouch. "A container," he said, "for carrying things." The peddler picked it up. It weighed almost nothing, but there was something about the way it rested in his palm, something that made his nervous hands go still. "What things?" "Whatever you need to carry," the merchant said. "Whatever you cannot bear to lose." The peddler's face changed then. The nervousness fell away, replaced by something softer, something almost like grief. He stood, holding the pouch for a long moment, and I saw his lips move silently, forming words I could not hear. When he looked up again, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "How much?" he asked, his voice thick. The merchant shook his head. "It was waiting for you," he said. "Take it and go in peace." The peddler clutched the pouch to his chest. He tried to speak, to offer thanks or payment or something, but no words came. Instead, he simply nodded once and then retreated to his corner. He did not show the pouch to anyone. He did not open it or examine it further. He simply held it close against his heart and stared out the window at the rain. I did not ask what the pouch meant to him. Some things are not meant to be spoken aloud. The 20th day of October. The rain continued through the night and into the following morning. The roads had become rivers of mud, impassable for all but the most determined travelers. My guests remained, waiting for the weather to break. The common room had taken on a different character, with so many people sharing the space. The children had grown accustomed to their surroundings and played quietly in a corner, building towers from wooden blocks I had found in the storage room left behind by some traveler years ago. The scholar worked steadily at her papers, occasionally muttering to herself or making notes in the margins of her books. The peddler sat apart, still clutching his leather pouch, lost in whatever memories it had stirred. The family spoke softly among themselves, making plans for the journey ahead once the roads cleared. And the merchant sat by his table, patient as a stone in a stream, waiting. It was the scholar who approached him next. She had been glancing at his wares all morning. I noticed her attention drawn away from her work by the objects arranged on the table. Finally, she set down her pen and removed her spectacles, rubbing her eyes wearily. "Forgive my curiosity," she said, rising from her seat and approaching the merchant. "But I cannot help noticing your collection. Some of these items appear quite old." The merchant inclined his head. "Some are older than others," he agreed. "Some are older than they appear." The scholar picked up one of the leather-bound books, examining its spine with practiced care. "There is no title," she observed, "no author's name. The binding style is unfamiliar to me, and I have studied the bookmaker's craft extensively." "It comes from far away," the merchant said, "from a place where books are made differently than here." The scholar opened the cover, and I watched her face change as she looked upon the first page. The text was visible from where I stood, dense lines of characters in a script I had never seen. The letters seemed to shift slightly as I watched, rearranging themselves in patterns that made no sense. "What language is this?" the scholar breathed. The merchant smiled. "One that has been forgotten," he said, "or perhaps one that has not yet been invented. The book is not certain which." The scholar looked up sharply, suspicion and fascination warring in her expression. "That is impossible." The merchant spread his hands. "Many things are impossible," he said, "until they are not." She turned more pages, her breath quickening as she encountered diagrams and illustrations that seemed to move when she was not looking directly at them. "This is remarkable," she whispered. "I have never seen anything like it." The merchant leaned back in his chair. "You have spent your life studying the past," he said, "looking for answers in things that have already been. But this book looks forward. It shows things that might be, if someone is wise enough to understand what it is saying." The scholar closed the book carefully, almost reverently. She held it against her chest for a moment, her eyes distant. "I have searched for so long," she said quietly, "for something that could tell me what my work means, whether any of it matters." "Does it matter to you?" the merchant asked. She was silent for a long moment. "Yes," she said finally, "more than anything. Then it matters," he said simply. "And perhaps this book can help you understand why." She tried to pay him as the others had. She offered coins, promised favors, even suggested trading some of her own books for it. But the merchant refused everything. "The book has been waiting," he said. "It knew you would come. Take it and use it well." The scholar returned to her seat, the strange book clutched in her hands. She did not open it again that day. She simply held it, looking out the window at the rain, and I saw in her face something that might have been hope. I watched her for a while, pretending to busy myself with tasks. in the kitchen. She sat very still, her fingers tracing the edges of the book's cover, her eyes distant. I wondered what she saw. What worlds were opening inside her mind? What possibilities were unfolding like flowers in spring? Later, when the evening had darkened and the rain had softened to a gentle patter, she came to find me in the kitchen. I was preparing soup, a simple thing made from the vegetables in my cellar and herbs from the bundles above the fireplace. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching me work, and then she spoke. "May I help?" she asked. I handed her a knife and a cutting board, and she set to work beside me, chopping carrots and turnips with the careful precision of someone accustomed to detailed work. We worked in silence for a while, comfortable and companionable, the kind of silence that needs no filling. "I have spent my whole life looking for answers," she said finally, her eyes on the vegetables before her. "I have read thousands of books, traveled to dozens of libraries, corresponded with scholars across the known world. I have followed every rumor, investigated every legend, pursued every hint of something more." She paused, setting down her knife. "And I have found many things," she continued, "facts, theories, arguments, counter-arguments, but never this." She touched the pocket of her coat where the book rested. Never something that felt like it was meant for me. I stirred the soup, watching the steam rise from the pot. "Perhaps that is the difference," I said, "between finding and being found." She looked at me, her spectacles reflecting the firelight. "What do you mean?" I chose my words carefully. "The merchant said his objects were waiting," I said. "Not looking, waiting. Perhaps the answers we seek cannot be hunted. Perhaps they can only be encountered when we are ready, when we have become the kind of person who can receive them." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she picked up her knife and resumed chopping, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You are wiser than you know, innkeeper," she said. I shook my head. "I am only patient," I said. "The crossroads teaches patience." She laughed softly, a sound of genuine amusement. "Perhaps that is wisdom," she said. "Perhaps patience is the door and everything else is just furniture." We finished preparing the soup together, and she ate with the other guests that evening, joining in their conversation for the first time since her arrival. She spoke of her research, her travels, the strange things she had seen in distant libraries. The family listened with wide eyes, especially the children who hung on every word of her stories about ancient manuscripts and hidden archives. When she retired for the night, she paused at the foot of the stairs and looked back at me. "Thank you," she said, "for the food, for the shelter, for the conversation, but mostly for reminding me that sometimes the best thing we can do is wait." I nodded. "Safe travels," I said. "I hope you'll find what you are looking for." She smiled. "I think perhaps I already have," she said. "Or rather, I think it found me." And then she climbed the stairs and disappeared into her room, the impossible book clutched against her heart like a treasure beyond price. The 21st day of October, By the fourth morning, the rain had begun to lighten. The clouds still hung heavy over the mountains, but patches of pale blue sky appeared between them, promising better weather to come. The roads remained difficult, but no longer impossible, and I could feel the restlessness growing among my guests. The family was the first to leave. The father had grown anxious about the delays, worried about reaching his wife's family before the mountain passes became too treacherous with the approaching winter. They packed their belongings quickly, the children excited about resuming their adventure. Before they left, the youngest child, a girl of perhaps 5 years, wandered over to the merchant's table. She had been eyeing it for days, too shy to approach while her parents watched. But now, with everyone distracted by preparations for departure, she found her courage. I watched from behind the kitchen counter as she stood on her toes to peer at the objects arranged there. The merchant said nothing, simply waited with that patient smile he always wore. The child's eyes moved from item to item until they settled on something I had not noticed before. It was a small figure, no larger than my thumb, carved from pale wood. It depicted a bird in flight, its wings spread wide, its beak open as though singing. The carving was exquisite, every feather detailed with impossible precision. The girl reached out and touched it with one small finger. "Birdie," she said softly. The merchant nodded. "Yes," he said. "It is a bird. Do you like birds?" She nodded vigorously. "Mama says there are different birds in the mountains. Birds I never seen before." The merchant picked up the carved figure and held it out to her. "This bird will help you learn their names," he said. "When you see a new bird, hold this and think about it. The names will come to you." The girl took the figure carefully as though it were made of glass. "Really? Really?" the merchant said. She opened her mouth to say something else, but her mother called her name from across the room. The girl turned and ran back to her family, the carved bird clutched in her fist. Her mother did not seem to notice the new treasure, too busy ensuring all their belongings were accounted for. I walked them to the door, helping to carry their bags to the wagon waiting outside. The mud had begun to dry, cracking at the edges where the sun touched it. The air smelled clean, washed fresh by the days of rain. "Thank you," the father said, pressing coins into my hand, "for your hospitality." "You are welcome here," I said. "Safe travels to you and your family." They climbed into the wagon, the children waving as the horses began to pull. I watched until they disappeared around the bend in the road, heading north toward the mountains and whatever new life awaited them there. When I returned inside, the merchant was packing away his wares. "You gave away another piece of your collection," I said. He nodded, carefully wrapping the crystal sphere in cloth before placing it back in its case. "The bird wanted to go with her," he said. "It has been waiting a long time for a child who loves birds." I sat down across from him. "May I ask you something?" "Of course. Now, how do you know? How do you know which item belongs to which person?" He paused in his packing, considering the question. "You do not always know," he admitted. "Sometimes I am wrong. Sometimes an item calls to someone who's not ready to receive it, and I have to say no. Sometimes nothing calls to anyone, and I simply move on to the next place. but mostly the items know. They have been waiting, some of them for a very long time, for the right person to come along. I am just the one who carries them from place to place until that happens. Where do the items come from? I asked. He smiled. From everywhere, he said. From places I have been and places I have not. Some I found. Some found me. Some were given to me by people who no longer needed them. And some, he paused, looking at his table with an expression I could not quite read, some have always been here. I simply agreed to look after them for a while. I did not know what to make of that, so I asked another question instead. How long have you been doing this? He resumed his packing, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. Longer than I can remember, he said, perhaps longer than I should. There was something in his voice when he said it, a weariness that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. I recognized it, that tone. I had heard it before, in the voices of travelers who had been on the road too long, who had seen too much and rested too little. You could stay, I said. The inn has room. You could rest here for a while. He looked at me then, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker in those pale eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or gratitude, or something older and deeper, something I could not name. Thank you, he said. That is kind, but the road calls to me. There are more things waiting to find their homes, and I am the only one who can carry them. He finished packing and stood, stretching his back with a soft groan. But perhaps, he added, I will return someday, when the road grows too long and the burden too heavy. Perhaps then I will accept your offer. You would be welcome, I said. Whenever you choose to come back. He nodded once, that formal gesture I'd noticed when he first arrived. Then he gathered his cases and carried them outside to his cart. The peddler left shortly after, his spirits lifted by whatever comfort the leather pouch had brought him. He pressed extra coins into my hand as he departed, insisting I had earned them by providing such a welcoming shelter from the storm. I tried to refuse, but he would not hear of it. The pouch, he said quietly, so only I could hear. I had a daughter once. She died when she was young, taken by fever. Before she passed, she gave me a lock of her hair, tied with a ribbon. I kept it in my pocket for years, but it wore through, and the lock was lost. I thought I would never stop grieving that loss. But now, he touched the pouch hanging from his belt. Now I have a place to keep her memory safe. Even if the lock is gone, the memory remains, and it will never be lost again. I did not know what to say, so I simply clasped his hand and wished him safe travels. The scholar was the last to leave. She had spent the morning organizing her papers, but I noticed she held the strange book close, never letting it out of her reach. I have been searching for something like this my whole life, she told me as she prepared to depart. A sign that my work has meaning, that there is something beyond what we can see and measure. And now she looked down at the book in her hands. Now I have it. I do not know what it will teach me, but I know it is important. Where will you go? I asked. She smiled, and there was a lightness in her expression that had not been there before. East, she said, to the coastal libraries. There are scholars there who may be able to help me understand what this book contains. And if not, she shrugged, then I will keep searching. But at least now I have something to search for. I walked her to the door and watched her set off down the road, her satchel bulging with papers and the mysterious book tucked safely inside her coat. She did not look back. The 22nd day of October, the merchant departed at dawn. I was awake, as I always am at that hour, tending to the fire and preparing the day's bread. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, measured and deliberate, and I met him at the bottom with a cup of tea and a slice of fresh toast. "You're kind," he said, accepting both, kinder than most. We sat together in the quiet morning light, the common room empty save for the two of us. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the first birds were beginning to sing, their voices thin and clear in the cold air. "I have been thinking," I said, "about what you do, carrying these objects from place to place, waiting for them to find their homes." The merchant nodded, sipping his tea. "It must be lonely," I said, "being always on the move, never staying in one place long enough to belong." He was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but there is purpose in it. And purpose can be a kind of companionship when nothing else is available." He finished his tea and stood gathering his cloak around his shoulders. Before he left, he reached into his pocket and withdrew something small, pressing it into my hand. "For you," he said, "a gift." I looked down at what he had given me. It was a key, old and tarnished, made of some dark metal I did not recognize. It was heavy in my palm, heavier than it looked. "What does it open?" I asked. He smiled that knowing smile one last time. "That," he said, "is for you to discover." And then he was gone, his cart creaking away down the road toward whatever destination awaited him next. I stood in the doorway and watched until he disappeared into the morning mist, swallowed by the same trees from which he had emerged days before. The key sits now on my desk as I write these words. I have examined closely, looking for clues to its purpose. There are no markings on it, no inscriptions or symbols. It is simply a key, old and heavy and waiting. I do not know what it opens. I have tried it in every lock in the inn, every door and chest and cabinet, without success. Perhaps it opens something that is not here. Perhaps it opens something that does not exist yet. Or perhaps, like the other objects the merchant carried, it is simply waiting for me to understand its purpose, waiting for the right moment to reveal what it was always meant to be. The white candle on the mantel burns steady as it has since the old woman first lit it all those winters ago. The fire in the hearth has settled to embers, casting soft shadows across the walls. Outside, the oak tree stands sentinel at the crossroads, its remaining leaves rustling in a breeze I cannot feel from here. I think about the merchant often, about the things he carried and the people who received them. The young couple with their empty box, heading west to build a new life. The peddler with his leather pouch, finding a place to keep his grief safe. The scholar with her impossible book, searching for meaning in a world that often seems to have none. The little girl with her carved bird, ready to learn the names of creatures she has never seen. Each of them received something they did not know they needed, something that had been waiting, perhaps for years, for exactly the right person to come along. And now I have a key. I do not know what door it will open. I do not know if I will ever find the lock that fits it, but I will keep it safe here on my desk beside this journal, and I will wait. Because that is what the key seems to be asking of me. Patience, trust, the willingness to hold on to something even when its purpose is not yet clear. The merchant understood something I am only beginning to grasp, that some things cannot be hurried, that some connections are made not through action, but through waiting, that the road brings us what we need if we are patient enough to receive it. I hope he finds his rest someday. I hope the burden he carries grows lighter with each object that finds its home. And I hope when the road finally grows too long that he remembers the crossroads and the inn that waits here. The door will be open, the fire will be warm, the welcome will be the same as it was the first day he arrived. All of this I record now, in the quiet hours of the night, while the world sleeps, and the candle burns, and the key waits silently for its purpose to be revealed. The 23rd day of October. I could not sleep last night. It was not the wind, though it howled fiercely around the corners of the inn, rattling the shutters and sending drafts snaking beneath the doors. It was not the cold, though frost had begun to form on the inside of my window, delicate patterns like fern fronds spreading across the glass. It was something else, something I cannot quite name. I lay in my bed, listening to the creaking of the old timbers, the settling of the stones, the distant whisper of the oak tree's branches scraping against each other in the darkness. And I thought about the merchant. Where was he now? Which road had he taken? How many more travelers would find their way to his cart, drawn by some force they did not understand, to objects they did not know they needed? I thought about the young couple heading west, their empty box tucked safely among their belongings. I wondered what they would put in it someday. A lock of hair from a child not yet born, a pressed flower from a garden not yet planted, a letter from a friend they had not yet met. The possibilities stretched out before them like the road itself, endless and full of wonder. I thought about the peddler with his leather pouch, carrying his daughter's memory close to his heart. The grief he bore was not lessened by the gift, I knew. Grief does not work that way, but perhaps it was made more bearable, knowing he had a safe place to keep what remained of her, a place that could not be worn through by time or travel or the simple attrition of days. I thought about the scholar and her impossible book. What secrets would it reveal to her when she finally found the key to understanding it? Would the answer she sought bring her peace, or would they only lead to more questions? Perhaps that was the point. Perhaps the searching itself was the answer she needed. And I thought about the little girl with her carved bird. She would be in the mountains by now, or nearly so, learning the names of creatures she had never seen, holding her small wooden figure in her small hands and listening for the knowledge to come. The merchant had given them all something precious, not just objects, but possibilities, doorways to futures they could not yet imagine, and in doing so, He had reminded me that the world is larger than I sometimes remember, that there are mysteries in it still, waiting to be discovered by those patient enough to look. The key sits heavy in my pocket now as I write these words. I have not found its lock. I am beginning to suspect I never will, but that no longer troubles me the way it once did. The merchant said some things are waiting for their purpose to be revealed. Perhaps the key is one of them. Perhaps its purpose is simply to remind me that not everything needs to be understood. The fire has burned low. The white candle on the mantel flickers slightly, casting dancing shadows on the wall. Outside, the wind has quieted, and I can hear the distant call of an owl, lonely and patient, waiting for an answer that may never come. I should try to sleep. Tomorrow will bring new travelers, new stories, new moments to be gathered and held safe. But tonight, I am content to sit here in the darkness, thinking about the merchant and his strange wares, wondering where the road has taken him, hoping he finds the rest he deserves. The morning came gray and cold, with low clouds hanging over the mountains like a shroud. I rose early, as I always do, and tended to the fire. The coals had held through the night, and it took only a few careful breaths and a handful of kindling to coax them back to flame. I watched the fire grow, feeling its warmth spread slowly through the common room, pushing back the chill that had crept in during the night. The bread I had set to rise the evening before was ready for the oven. I shaped the loaves carefully, my hands moving through the familiar motions without conscious thought. There's something meditative about bread making. The feel of the dough beneath your fingers, the smell of yeast and flour, and the promise of warmth to come. It grounds me in the present moment, reminds me that the simple tasks are often the most important. While the bread baked, I cleaned the common room, swept the flagstone floor, gathering the dust and bits of dried rushes that had scattered overnight. Wiped down the tables with a damp cloth, removing the rings left by mugs and bowls from the previous day's guests, straightened the chairs, plumped the cushions on the bench by the fire, checked that the lanterns had enough oil for another evening's use. These tasks, too, are a kind of meditation, a way of caring for the space that cares for so many. The inn has sheltered travelers for years beyond counting, and it asks only that I tend to it in return. Keep the fire burning. Keep the floors clean. Keep the welcome warm. I understand this exchange. It is the foundation of everything I do. 3 more days have passed since the merchant's departure. The roads have dried and traffic through the crossroads has returned to its usual pace. A farrier heading south, his tools clanking in their leather cases. A pair of monks traveling east, their robes mud-stained and their faces serene. A young man on horseback riding hard toward some destination he did not name, pausing only long enough to water his horse and swallow a quick meal before vanishing again down the northern road. None of them stayed long. None of them noticed the keys sitting on my desk or asked about the merchant who had been here before. They had their own journeys, their own burdens, their own objects, waiting to be found somewhere down the road. The farrier interested me, though. His name was Aldrich, and he had been working the roads for nearly 30 years, traveling from village to village, town to town, shoeing horses and mending tools wherever he was needed. He was a quiet man, weathered by sun and wind and the constant motion of his trade, with hands that looked like they had been carved from oak wood themselves. We sat together for a while, sharing a pot of tea and watching the fire. He told me about the horses he had known over the years, each one different, each one with its own personality and temperament. There was a mare in the eastern valleys who would only let him work on her hooves if he sang to her. A stallion in the mountain settlements who had once saved his life during a rock slide, pushing him out of the way of falling stones. A pony belonging to a traveling circus who could count to 10 by stamping her foot. He loved horses, I could tell, not in the sentimental way some people claim to love animals, but in the deep, practical way of someone who has spent their life in partnership with them. He understood them, he respected them, and they, in turn, trusted him. Before he left, he looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. "You have a good inn here," he said, "a good fire, a good heart. The horses in your stable are well cared for. That tells me everything I need to know about a man." I thanked him, and he nodded once, that simple gesture that says more than words ever could. Then he gathered his tools and continued on his way, southward toward whatever horses waited for his care. The monks were different. They arrived in the late afternoon, their sandals caked with mud, their robes damp from a crossing through one of the streams that had swollen with the recent rains. They were young, both of them, perhaps 20 years old, with the earnest faces of those who have recently found their calling. They belonged to an order I did not recognize, one that required them to travel in pairs and speak only when necessary. This made conversation difficult, but not impossible. They communicated mostly through gestures and expressions, and I found myself understanding them more easily than I expected. They had been walking for 3 weeks, they told me, through a combination of signs and a few carefully chosen words. Their order was tracing the path of a saint who had traveled these roads centuries ago, stopping at each place the saint had rested, praying and meditating before moving on. The crossroads was one of those places. I did not know this. In all my years tending the inn, no one had ever told me that a saint had passed through here, but the monks were certain. They had a map, old and faded, with the crossroads clearly marked. There was a symbol beside it, a circular design I did not recognize, and the word "blessed" written in a script that looked older than the map itself. They asked if they might pray at the oak tree, and I saw no reason to refuse. I watched from the doorway as they knelt in the mud beneath its branches, their heads bowed, their lips moving in silent devotion. They stayed there for nearly an hour, untroubled by the cold or the damp or the curious glances of travelers passing by on the road. When they finally rose, there was a peace in their faces that had not been there before. They thanked me wordlessly with a bow that felt like a blessing, Then they continued on their way eastward toward the next stop on their pilgrimage. I stood at the crossroads for a long time after they left, looking at the oak tree with new eyes. A saint had rested here once, had prayed beneath its branches, perhaps centuries ago. And now, two young monks had come to honor that memory, tracing the footsteps of someone they would never meet, connected to the past by faith and devotion and the simple act of walking. The crossroads holds more history than I knew, more stories than I could ever tell, and I'm only one small part of it, one brief chapter in a book that stretches back further than memory and forward into possibilities I cannot imagine. But I have been thinking. The merchant said each item in his collection was waiting for someone, waiting for the right person to come along, the person who needed it most, even if they did not know it themselves. The empty box for the young woman building a new life, the pouch for the grieving father, the book for the searching scholar, the bird for the curious child. What then am I waiting for? I have been the keeper of this crossroads for many years now. I have watched countless travelers pass through, some staying only moments, others remaining for days or weeks while they recovered from illness or injury or simple exhaustion. I have fed them and sheltered them and listened to their stories, and then I have watched them go, continuing on to wherever the road takes them. But I have never left. The inn is my home. It has been since my father built it, since he placed the first stone and raised the first beam and told me that someday it would be mine. I have never questioned that inheritance. I have never wondered what might lie beyond the crossroads, down roads I have never traveled, in places I have never seen, until now. The key sits heavy in my pocket as I write. I have taken to carrying it with me, though I cannot say why. It feels right somehow to keep it close, as though it belongs to me in a way I do not yet understand. Perhaps that is what the merchant was trying to tell me, that the key is not just an object, it is a question, a possibility, a door that has not yet been opened but might be someday if I choose to look for it. I do not know if I will ever find that door. I do not know if I'm meant to. But the key has given me something I did not expect. Not certainty, not answers, but something perhaps more valuable, wonder. The world is larger than I thought. There are things in it I have never imagined, objects and places and possibilities that exist just beyond the edge of what I can see. The merchant carries them from place to place, waiting for them to find their homes. And now I carry a key. Maybe that is enough. Maybe wonder is the door the key is meant to open, not a physical door, not a lock made of metal and wood, but something else. A door in my mind, a door in my heart, a willingness to believe that there is more to the world than what I already know. If that is true, then the key has already served its purpose. It has already opened something inside me. And perhaps that was what the merchant intended all along. The 24th day of October, a young woman arrived, yesterday, alone, her horse lathered from hard riding. She came from the east, from the coastal towns, and she carried with her a burden I recognized immediately, though she did not speak of it: loss. The kind that leaves a person hollow, moving through the world like a ghost of who they once were. I welcomed her without questions, as I welcome everyone. I offered her food and drink and a place by the fire, and she accepted all of it with a gratitude that seemed too heavy for such simple gifts. She sat near the hearth and stared into the flames, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she did not drink. Her name was Elena, though she did not tell me that at first. She simply sat, silent and still, as though movement itself required more energy than she possessed. Her clothes were well made, but travel-worn, the kind of practical garments someone wears when they expect to be on the road for a long time. Her hair was dark, pulled back in a simple braid that had begun to loosen from days of riding. Her eyes were the color of the sea in winter, gray and deep and full of storms. I busied myself with the evening tasks, giving her space without abandoning her. I swept the floors. I restocked the kindling box. I checked on the horses in the stable, including her exhausted mount, which I rubbed down and fed an extra portion of oats. The horse was a chestnut mare with gentle eyes, and she nuzzled my hand when I offered her a carrot, as though grateful for the kindness. When I returned inside, Elena was crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, just silent tears streaming down her cheeks, catching the firelight as they fell. She did not seem to notice them. She did not wipe them away. I sat down across from her, not speaking, simply present. Sometimes that is all a person needs. Not words, not advice, not solutions, just someone nearby, someone to bear witness to their grief. The fire crackled outside. The wind had picked up, moaning softly around the corners of the inn. A shutter somewhere upstairs rattled briefly, then fell silent. The oak tree's branches draped against each other with a sound like whispered secrets. Ancient voices speaking in a language I could not understand. After a long while, she spoke. "My brother is dead," she said. Her voice was flat, empty of inflection, as though the words themselves had been hollowed out by too much use. "He was a sailor. His ship went down in a storm 2 weeks ago. There were no survivors." "I am sorry," I said. The words felt inadequate, as they always do in the face of such loss, but they were all I had to offer. She shook her head, a small, tight movement that seemed to reject not my condolences, but the entire situation. The unfairness of it, the impossibility of accepting what could not be undone. "He was all I had," she said. "Our parents died when we were young. Fever took our mother first, then our father 3 winters later. It was just the 2 of us, always, Thomas and Elena, against the world." She tried to smile, but it crumbled before it could form. "And now," she swallowed hard, "now it is just me." The fire crackled. Outside, the wind had picked up, moaning softly around the corners of the inn. The oak tree's branches scraped against each other with a sound like whispered secrets. "Where are you going?" I asked. She shrugged. a gesture of such profound weariness that it seemed to encompass everything she had lost. I do not know a way anywhere. I cannot stay in that town anymore. Every street, every shop, every face reminds me of him. I thought if I just kept moving, maybe the pain would stay behind. But it follows me. It follows me everywhere. She looked at me then, her eyes red-rimmed and desperate, searching my face for something I was not sure I could give. "Will it ever stop?" she asked. "Will this ever stop hurting?" I considered the question carefully. It deserved a careful answer, not platitudes, not false comfort, but the truth as I understood it. "No," I said finally, "it will not stop, but it will change. The sharp edges will soften. The weight will become easier to carry. You will learn to live with it, and someday you will be able to remember him with joy instead of only sorrow. You will think of him and smile before you cry. And eventually, the smiles will outnumber the tears." She was quiet for a long moment, absorbing my words. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Outside, an owl called once, then fell silent. "How do you know?" she asked softly. "Because I have carried my own grief," I said. "My father built this inn. He raised me here, taught me everything I know, how to tend a fire, how to welcome a stranger, how to listen when someone needs to be heard. And then he died, a fever that took him in 3 days, and I was alone, just as you are now. The pain was unbearable at first. I thought I would drown in it. I thought I would disappear into it and never find my way back." I paused, remembering those dark days. The empty rooms, the silence that seemed to press against me from all sides. The way I had stood at the crossroads, looking down each road in turn, wondering if I should simply choose one and walk until I could not walk anymore. But I did not, I continued. I learned to live with it. I learned to carry it without letting it crush me. And now, when I think of him, I feel grateful that he was my father, even though I miss him every day. The grief is still there. It will always be there. But it has become part of me, woven into who I am, rather than something that threatens to destroy me. She looked at me with something like hope in her eyes. You fragile thing, that hope, easy to crush with the wrong word. But I had told her the truth, and sometimes truth is the only comfort we can offer. She stayed for 3 days. During that time, I did not ask her to talk about her brother. I did not press her for details about her grief or her plans. I simply let her rest. I fed her and gave her a comfortable room and let the inn work its quiet magic the way it always does for those who need it most. On the first day, she mostly slept. I could hear her moving about in her room sometimes, pacing back and forth as people do when sleep will not come. But for the most part, she rested. I left trays of food outside her door, simple things that required no effort to eat. Bread with butter, cheese, sliced apples, a pot of tea that stayed warm on the small brazier I had placed there for that purpose. On the second day, she came down to the common room and sat by the fire again. But this time, she did not cry. She simply sat, watching the flames, her hands still around a mug of tea. Her face was pale, drawn, but there was something different in her eyes. Not peace, not yet, but perhaps the first stirring of it, the recognition that survival might be possible. I went about my work, keeping her in the corner of my vision without hovering. I cleaned and cooked and tended to the other travelers who passed through, a merchant heading north with a cart full of woolen cloth, a young apprentice walking to his new master in the eastern cities. They came and went, and Elena watched them go, saying nothing, simply observing the flow of life through the crossroads, and then, unprompted, she began to talk. She told me about her brother, about how he had taught her to swim when they were children, patient and gentle, holding her up in the water until she found her own buoyancy. About the way he laughed, loud and unrestrained, filling whatever room he was in with warmth. About how he could never pass a stray cat without stopping to pet it, even if it meant being late for important appointments. She told me about the games they had played as children, the secret language they had invented, the fort they had built from driftwood and canvas in a cove near their home. She told me about the promises they had made to each other when their parents died, vows to always look out for one another, to never be truly alone. He was the one who convinced me to stay in the coastal town, she said. After our parents passed, I wanted to leave. I wanted to go somewhere new, somewhere that did not hurt to look at. But Thomas said we should stay. He said our roots were there, even if our family was gone. He said the sea was home. She fell silent for a moment, her eyes fixed on the flames. He loved the sea, she continued, more than anything. He said it was the only thing bigger than his feelings, the only thing that could hold all the joy and sorrow and wonder he carried inside. He said when he was on the water, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. A log shifted in the fireplace, sending up a brief shower of sparks. And now the sea has taken him, she said, and I do not know how to forgive it. I did not try to offer her forgiveness or tell her that the sea was blameless or any of the other things people say when they do not know what else to say. I simply listened. I let her words fill the space between us, and I held them carefully, the way you hold something precious that someone has entrusted to your care. She told me about the small wooden bird he had carved for her on her 10th birthday, which she still kept in her pocket. About the way he would whistle while he worked, always the same tune, something their mother had sung to them when they were small. About the last letter he had written her, sent from a port 3 days before the storm, full of jokes and plans and the casual assumption that they would see each other again soon. She pulled it out to show me, the small wooden bird, a tiny thing, no larger than my thumb, worn smooth by years of handling, a bird in flight, its wings spread wide, its beak open as though singing. I stared at it for a long moment, my heart suddenly loud in my chest. That bird, I said carefully. Where did your brother get it? She frowned. He made it himself. He was always carving things, little figures, toys for children in the town. He said it made people happy. I thought of the merchant, of the little girl with her carved bird, of the objects that waited for their rightful owners, sometimes for years, before finding their way home. May I see it? I asked. She handed it to me, and I turned it over in my hands. It was not the same bird. The carving style was different, the wood a lighter shade, but the resemblance was unmistakable. Two birds made by two different hands, yet somehow connected by something I could not explain. Your brother, I said slowly, had a gift, a true gift. She smiled then, the first real smile I'd seen from her. Yes, she said, he did. I handed the bird back to her. She tucked it into her pocket, where it had clearly lived for many years. Keep it safe, I said. And when the grief becomes too heavy, hold it in your hand and remember that he made it for you. Remember that he loved you. That love does not disappear just because someone is gone. She looked at me with eyes that were still sad, but no longer quite so empty. Thank you, she said, for everything. She left on the third morning, heading west toward the frontier. She said she wanted to see something new, something that did not remind her of the life she had lost. I wished her well and watched her ride away, the morning sun catching the dust from her horse's hooves. The carved bird stayed with her, but something of her story stayed with me. Oh, the 25th day of October. I have been thinking about the carved birds. Two of them made by different hands in different places at different times. One carried by a merchant of strange wares, waiting for a child who loves birds. One carved by a sailor for his sister, worn smooth by years of touch. Coincidence, perhaps. The world is full of carved birds, after all. It is not so unusual that two should cross paths in the same place, even in a small inn at a lonely crossroads. But I do not think it is coincidence. The merchant said his objects were waiting for the right people, waiting sometimes for years, until they found their destined homes. And the young woman's bird had been waiting too, in a way, waiting to remind her that she was loved, waiting to give her something to hold on to when everything else was gone. Perhaps all objects are like this. Perhaps everything we carry, everything we make, everything we treasure is waiting for something, a purpose, a connection, a moment when its true meaning is revealed. The key in my pocket weighs heavy against my leg. I take it out sometimes, turning it over in my hands, tracing the shape of its teeth with my fingertips. It has not revealed its purpose yet, but I am learning to trust that it will when the time is right. The merchant understood this. He understood that patience is not passive, not resignation, not giving up. It is active. It is attentive. It is the willingness to hold space for something even when you do not know what it is. I am holding space for the key. And in return, the key is teaching me something I did not expect. That waiting is its own kind of journey. That not knowing is its own kind of knowledge. That the things we carry shape us just as surely as the roads we travel. The 26th day of October. A letter arrived today, carried by a road courier making his regular circuit through the region. It was addressed simply to the innkeeper at the crossroads, with no return address and no indication of who had sent it. I recognized the hand that had written my direction, though. It was careful, neat, the hand of someone who had been taught to write properly, but had spent years doing other work. The kind of hand that remembered its training, even after long absence. I opened it with curious hands, folding the single sheet of paper aside. The handwriting was neat but unfamiliar, the words written in dark ink that had not faded despite the journey. The paper was good quality, thick and smooth, the kind a scholar might use for important documents. I carried the letter to my desk and read it by the light of the window, the gray afternoon filtering in through the glass. Dear friend, I hope this letter finds you well. I'm writing from a town 3 days' ride to the west, where I have stopped to rest and resupply before continuing my journey. I wanted to thank you again for your hospitality. The days I spent at your inn were a gift, one I did not know I needed until I received it. The fire, the food, the quiet kindness of your welcome, all of it helped to heal something inside me that I did not know was broken. I have been thinking often about our conversations, about grief and how we learn to carry it, about patience and how we learn to wait, about the way the crossroads seems to gather people at exactly the moment they need to be gathered, as though the place itself understands something about timing that we do not. I have been thinking, too, about the merchant and his strange wares. Specifically, about the key he gave you. You seemed uncertain what it was for, and I confess I am uncertain, too. But I have a thought that might help. My brother, the one who died, used to say that some doors are not made of wood and metal. Some doors are made of moments, choices, chances taken or not taken. He said the key to those doors is not something you find. It is something you become. I did not understand what he meant, not fully. Not until I found myself standing at the crossroads, trying to decide which road to take. And then I realized that the choice itself was the door, that by choosing I was opening something inside myself that had been closed. I do not know if that helps, but it felt important to share. I am heading west, as I told you. There is a settlement there, a new one, where they are always looking for people willing to work hard and start fresh. I think I will stay for a while, build something new, learn to live with my grief instead of running from it. My brother would have liked that, I think. He always said I was braver than I knew. Maybe it is time to find out if he was right. Thank you again for everything, for the warm fire and the good food and the quiet understanding, for not asking questions I was not ready to answer, for simply being there, steady and patient, while I found my way back to myself. I hope our paths cross again someday. Until then, know that you have a friend in the West, thinking of you and wishing you well. With gratitude, E. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer of my desk, beside the other keepsakes I have collected over the years. A pressed flower from a bride who stayed here on her wedding night, her joy so bright it seemed to fill the entire inn. A coin from a country I have never heard of, given to me by a merchant who claimed to have traveled to the edge of the known world. A child's drawing of the inn, given to me by a family passing through on their way to a new home, the lines wobbly but full of love. Small things, ordinary things, but precious, each of them in their own way. They are my collection, I suppose. The wares I have gathered over years of tending this crossroads, objects that carry meaning beyond their physical form. The key to those doors is not something you find. It is something you become. I think I understand now. The 27th day of October. I woke early this morning before the dawn had fully broken. The common room was still dark, the fire reduced to embers, the windows gray with pre-dawn light. I lay in my bed for a long moment, listening to the silence, feeling the weight of the inn around me like a familiar embrace. Then I got up, dressed, and went outside. The air was cold, sharp enough to make my breath cloud in front of me. Frost had formed on the grass overnight, silvering the blades and turning the world into something out of a dream. The oak tree stood at the crossroads, its bare branches reaching toward a sky that was just beginning to lighten in the east. I walked to the tree and stood beneath it, looking up at the canopy of empty branches. The leaves had all fallen now, scattered across the road and gathered in drifts against the stable wall. The tree looked vulnerable without them, exposed, stripped down to its essential form. But there was beauty in it too, a honest beauty that needed no adornment. The tree was what it was, nothing more and nothing less, alas. And in its bareness, I could see the strength of its structure, the way each branch grew from the trunk, the way the roots must stretch deep beneath the earth to anchor something so tall. I thought about the merchant and his strange wares, about the key in my pocket, about the young woman and her carved bird, and the little girl with hers, about all the travelers who have passed through this crossroads over the years, each of them carrying something, leaving something, taking something away. And I thought about myself. I have been the keeper of this inn for as long as I can remember. I have welcomed travelers and fed them and sheltered them and listened to their stories. And then I've watched them go. I have stayed, always rooted to this place, like the oak tree at the crossroads. But the key has changed something in me. Not my circumstances, not my duties, not my love for this inn and this place and the work I do here, but something deeper, something I cannot quite name. A door has opened, perhaps, not a physical door, not a door I can see or touch, but a door in my heart, a willingness to wonder, a willingness to imagine that the world holds more than I know. The merchant gave me that gift. He did not know what the key would open, or perhaps he did, and he simply chose not to tell me. But he knew that the key was waiting for me, that I was the one who needed it. And I think I understand now what it opens. It opens me. It opens my curiosity, my imagination, my willingness to believe in things I cannot explain. It opens the part of me that had grown closed over the years, the part that had stopped asking questions because the answers seemed too far away to reach. The key does not open a lock. It opens a way of seeing, a way of being, a way of moving through the world with wonder instead of resignation. And that, I think, is the strangest and most valuable ware the merchant could have given me. The 28th day of October, another day at the crossroads, another round of travelers passing through. This morning brought a group of pilgrims, 6 of them, walking a circuit of sacred sites scattered throughout the region. They were tired but cheerful, their spirits lifted by the knowledge that they were nearing the end of their journey. They shared a meal in the common room, their conversation lively with memories of the places they had seen and the people they had met along the way. They had been walking for 2 months, they told me. 2 months of dusty roads and rain-soaked paths, of sleeping in hedgerows and barns, of kindnesses offered by strangers and hardships endured with faith. They had climbed mountains and crossed rivers, passed through villages where no one spoke their language and in cities where the noise never stopped. And through it all, they had prayed. Every morning at dawn, every evening at dusk. Their faith was the thread that held them together, the purpose that kept them moving when their bodies begged for rest. One of them, an older woman with a kind face and work-worn hands, noticed the key sitting on my desk. "What does that open?" she asked. I smiled. "I am not certain yet," I said. "It was given to me by a traveling merchant. He said I would discover its purpose when the time was right." She nodded, as though this made perfect sense. Her eyes were the color of chestnuts, warm and deep, and they seemed to look at me without judgment, without expectation, simply with a gentle curiosity that felt like a gift. "Some keys take a while," she said. "Some doors are not ready to be opened." She paused, studying me with those knowing eyes. "But you will find it, I can tell. You have the patience for it." I thanked her, unsure what else to say. She smiled and reached out to pat my hand. "Patience is a rare gift," she said. "Most people rush through life, always looking for the next thing, the next place, the next answer. But you," she gestured at the inn around us, "you have learned to wait, to be still, to let things come to you in their own time." "The inn teaches that," I said. "The crossroads teaches it. There is no rushing the road." She nodded again, that gentle motion of understanding. "Exactly," she said, "and that is why you will find what the key opens, when you stop looking for it, when you simply let it find you." She rejoined her companions then, and they finished their meal in companionable silence. Before they left, each of them came to thank me individually, pressing small tokens into my hands, a smooth stone from a sacred stream, a dried flower from a mountain shrine, a prayer written on a scrap of parchment. I tried to refuse, but they would not hear of it. "These are our thanks," one of them said, a young man with a shaved head and gentle eyes, "for the food, for the warmth, for the welcome. May your hearth never grow cold." They departed shortly before laughter, continuing on their pilgrimage, their voices fading into the distance until only the wind remained. I stood in the doorway and watched them go, 6 figures growing smaller against the horizon until they crested a hill and disappeared from sight. The tokens they had given me sit now on the mantel beside the white candle. The stone smooth and cool, the flower faded but still fragrant. The prayer, its words written in a language I do not know but somehow understand, small things but precious, like all the things travelers leave behind. The afternoon brought a young farmer driving a cart full of the last of his autumn harvest. Squash and pumpkins and late apples all heading to market in the southern towns. He stopped to rest his horse and bought a mug of cider, sitting by the fire for perhaps an hour before continuing on his way. His name was Garrett, and he had the look of a man who had worked hard his whole life and expected nothing less from the years ahead. His hands were calloused, his face weathered by sun and wind, his eyes the color of freshly tilled earth. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were careful and considered, chosen with the same precision he probably used when planting seeds or mending fences. He told me about his farm, a small holding in the hills to the south. It had been his father's farm and his grandfather's before that, and someday he hoped it would be his children's. He had a wife waiting for him at home and a daughter who had just learned to walk. He smiled when he spoke of them, a soft, private smile that said more than any words could. The harvest had been good this year, he said, not exceptional, but solid. Enough to see them through the winter with a little left over to sell at market. He was grateful for that. There had been years when the harvest had failed, when the rains came too early or too late, when insects devoured the crops or disease spread through the livestock. Those years had been hard. This year was easier, and he did not take it for granted. Before he left, he pressed a small pumpkin into my hands, insisting I keep it. "For your table," he said. "A good pumpkin makes any meal better." I thanked him and watched him drive away, his cart rattling down the southern road toward market. The pumpkin sits now on the kitchen windowsill, its orange skin bright against the gray autumn light. I will roast it tomorrow perhaps and make soup, or save it for the first truly cold night, when its warmth will be most welcome. The evening brought a messenger riding fast, carrying news of some important event to someone who waited anxiously in the eastern cities. He did not stay long, just long enough to change horses and swallow a few bites of bread before riding on into the gathering darkness. I did not ask him what news he carried. Messengers rarely share such things, and I have learned not to press. But I could see the tension in his shoulders, the urgency in his movements. Whatever he carried, it was important. Perhaps it would bring joy, perhaps sorrow. Perhaps it would change someone's life forever. That is the nature of messages, I think. They are doors, opening onto futures we cannot predict. The messenger is simply the key that unlocks them. Each of them passed through the crossroads as countless others have before them. Each of them carried their own burdens, their own hopes, their own objects, waiting to find their purpose. And each of them left something behind, even if only a moment, a word, a memory. That is what this place does. It collects moments. It holds them safe, like treasures in a chest until someone needs them. The merchant understood that. His cart full of strange wares was just another way of saying the same thing. Objects are moments made solid, memories given form, connections waiting to be made. And the inn is no different. It is a collection of moments gathered over years and years, held safe in these walls and these stones and this fire that never quite goes out. I am the keeper of those moments. the guardian of the crossroads, the one who waits and welcomes and remembers. And now I have a key. I do not know what it will open, perhaps nothing, perhaps everything, perhaps the question itself is the answer, and the wondering is the point. But I am no longer troubled by not knowing. The merchant taught me that. The young woman with her carved bird taught me that. The pilgrims and the farmer and the messenger, all of them taught me that. The road brings us what we need if we are patient enough to receive it. And I am patient. I have always been patient. It is the gift this place has given me over all these years of watching and waiting and welcoming. The key will reveal its purpose when the time is right. And until then, I will hold it safe, and I will wonder, and I will wait. That is enough. That is more than enough. The 29th day of October. I close this entry as I close all entries in the quiet hours of the night by candlelight at the desk my father built for me when I was still a child. The wood of the desk has grown smooth over the years, polished by countless hours of writing. I can feel the grain beneath my fingertips, the whirls and knots that tell the story of the tree it once was. My father chose this wood carefully, I remember. He said it came from an oak that had fallen in a storm, an old tree that had stood for centuries before the wind finally took it. He said the wood would carry some of the tree's patience, its endurance, its willingness to wait. I believe he was right. The white candle on the mantel burns steady, its flame unwavering, despite the drafts that slip beneath the door. It has burned for many winters now, never diminishing, never flickering out. The old woman who gave it to me said it would be a beacon, a light in the darkness. I did not understand what she meant then. I think I understand now. The fire in the hearth has settled to embers, casting soft orange light across the walls. The shadows move gently, slowly, as though they too are preparing for rest outside. The oak tree stands at the crossroads, patient and enduring, its bare branches reaching toward a sky full of stars. The stars are particularly bright tonight. I stood at the window for a while, looking up at them, trying to pick out the constellations my father taught me when I was young. The hunter with his belt of 3 bright stars, the great bear wheeling slowly around the pole, the sisters dancing in their eternal circle. The stars do not change. They are the same stars my father watched, and his father before him, and all the fathers stretching back to the beginning of time. They are the same stars the merchant watches, wherever he is tonight. The same stars Elena sees in her new settlement to the west. The same stars the little girl with her carved bird looks up at in her mountain home. We are all beneath the same sky, all walking beneath the same stars. And somehow, that thought is comforting. The merchant is out there somewhere on roads I have never traveled, carrying his strange wares to people who do not yet know they need them. The young couple is building their homestead in the west, filling their empty box with the treasures of a new life. The peddler is selling his ribbons and buttons in the southern markets, his daughter's memory safe in a pouch against his heart. The scholar is reading her impossible book in some coastal library, searching for answers to questions that have no end. The little girl is learning the names of mountain birds, her carved figure clutched in her small hand. And the grieving sister is starting over somewhere in the west, building something new from the ashes of what she lost, finding the courage her brother always said she had, becoming the key to her own door. All of them carry something from this place. All of them leave something behind. And I remain the keeper, the witness, the one who waits. The key sits on my desk, heavy and silent, waiting for its moment to come. I do not know when that will be. I do not know what it will look like when it arrives, but I trust that it will happen in its own time, in its own way, because that is what the crossroads teaches. Patience, trust, the willingness to wait without knowing what we are waiting for. I have been the keeper of this crossroads for many years. I have seen travelers come and go, seasons turn, storms pass through, and leave the world washed clean. I have watched the oak tree grow from a sapling that barely reached my waist to the ancient giant it is today. I have buried my father in the churchyard of the nearest village, and I have wept for him alone in this room, and I have learned to carry his memory the way I carry everything else, with patience, with care, with the steady rhythm of days. The merchant gave me a key, but more than that, he gave me a reminder that the world is full of mysteries, that not everything can be understood, that some things are meant to be wondered at, not explained. And that is enough. That is more than enough. The fire settles. The candle burns. The night deepens around me like a blanket, soft and dark and full of dreams. Tomorrow, new travelers will come. New stories will unfold. New moments will be gathered and held safe within these walls. Perhaps the key will find its lock. Perhaps it will continue to wait. Either way, I will be here, and I will be here as I have always been, welcoming, listening, remembering. The keeper of the crossroads, the guardian of the between time, the one who waits.
And so we come to the end of another night at the Crossroads Inn. The merchant has continued on his journey, carrying his strange wares to those who need them most. The travelers have found what they were looking for, even if they did not know they were looking for anything at all. And the innkeeper remains, patient as always, wondering about the key that waits on his desk for its purpose to be revealed. Thank you for spending this time with us, here in the warmth of the fire and the soft glow of the candle. We hope these words have brought you peace and that you carry a little of this quiet with you into your dreams. If you enjoyed tonight's story, consider subscribing to the Candlelit Journal so you never miss a new entry. And if you have a moment, a like or a comment would mean more than you know. Until we meet again, may your road be gentle, your burdens light, and your rest deep and peaceful. Good night.